my favorite phrase, you got to slow down to speed up. Just making sure that they have what they need to contribute to the team 100%. I do feel that if you give your engineers like autonomy and basically not hand-holding them, empowering them, making sure that they have the competence to make certain decisions, especially with their stories, and pushing them to take ownership of their own work, you really don't need to be managing them too much. Take a step back, provide support when needed, make sure that they have everything that they need. But at the end of the day, they are seniors, they are engineers who are capable of making those decisions. So allow them to make them and just be there to support them. There's always going to be the OCD of, for me at least, I want to refactor it. I want to change it. I found a better way of doing it. Oh, this doesn't make sense. We have to find the balance of, yes, finding the right way of doing something is ideal, but we also have our commitments to the company. We have to make sure our features are deliverable. We have to make sure that we don't introduce too much scope creep, too much tech debt.
Hi, I'm Maria, and this is the Agile State of Mind. Welcome. And we are here in the podcast edition where I deconstruct the role of an engineering manager, try to make sense of the role confusion, and understand the challenges of the transition from a developer to a leader. You can find this interview both on YouTube and as a podcast. See the links in the description. And today, my guest is a colleague from Fyllo, Brandon Parrott. Hello, Brandon. How are you?
Hi, how you doing?
I'm good. Great to have you here. So Brandon is a full stack developer. You are a full stack developer, aren't you?
Yes, I am a full stack developer.
And you recently got promoted to be a team lead. So again, we will witness a success story of an engaged and collaborative developer that is moving forward in his career. And Brandon and I work together right now, and it's for the second time because we previously worked together in OutSystems, and then we both followed Robert to go to Fyllo. I will need to interview Robert Husick as well, soonish, let's see when. Fyllo, where we work right now, is an American startup headquartered in Chicago, and we provide marketing and regulatory solutions to highly regulated businesses like cannabis and CBD dispensaries, cryptocurrency, short-term rentals, and so on. And currently, Brandon is a team lead for our US-based team. So I'm very glad to have you here. I would like to understand today a little bit about your journey from a developer to a leader, and also understand what were the challenges of the moving onto the new role. What did you really like as a developer, and so on. So I would like to start from the developer role, actually, because I noticed with my previous guests that there's a little bit of confusion about what the full stack means. I was speaking with Luis Castro in my first interview, and he was explaining that to him, a full stack developer is like a real product developer, that it doesn't only mean that you're good in the technical side, but also understanding the product, or collaborating with the UXers and so on. So I would like to understand what you understand.
That's a hard one. Okay. Starting with hard questions. Interesting. So he was mentioning that a full stack engineer was more of like a product engineer, not just, front end, back end, understanding databases or caching layers or infrastructure. He was mentioning that a full stack engineer in his mind was the whole product, understanding like the stakeholders' view of the product all the way to, delivering the product, right?
Yeah. So basically, you need to understand the business and understand what the product owner does and some tools that UXer does. And then also, let's say the BI part. So you know what you will actually measure in what you're actually doing. So it changes a little bit the way you look at things.
So my point of view on a full stack engineer, it's a little bit different. I would say one of the major things about a full stack engineer is understanding, of course, the deliverables of the whole product from from the design sessions with PMs all the way to, implementation and deployment of it. My point of view of full stack engineer is not just understanding what the product is. It's more along the lines of how can I touch every layer of the engineering stack to deliver a feature or a product to the customers. What that entails in my mind is a full stack engineer needs to understand one is the UI, the UX of the platform. How is the user going to interact? How is the actual product going to be used within the industry? But then also the implementation of it, all the way from the front end to, if you're using JavaScript, the NPM modules that you're pulling in, to the back end layer API implementation, and into even the orchestration of the platform CI/CD, deploying it to either AWS, Azure, or GCP, and then how you're going to actually maintain it, continuous integrate and deploy the platform. So in my mind, a full stack engineer understands, at least at some level, the whole pipeline from the design step all the way to the deployments step.
Okay, makes
Did I
sense. Yeah.
answer?
Yeah, you answered. And I think this is what I always understood as a full stack developer. So I would like to ask you, is there actually a full stack developer that knows all of what you just mentioned? Or people usually have some affinity that they are better at front end or they are better than back end?
Truthfully, in my opinion, no, there's no such thing as a full stack engineer. I feel like your strong suit is either front end, back end, infrastructure. The term full stack engineer really just means software engineer, developer. In my mind, a developer is someone who specializes in a certain language, focusing on a specific domain, be it front end, back end, APIs, databases, like very domain specific. And that would be, in my mind, a developer, like a software developer. Now, when I think of a full stack engineer, that's a software engineer, because you're thinking of it as a whole engineering perspective of how does all the pieces fit together? How do, once I build out a certain feature, how do I deploy it? How do I test it? How do I integrate it? A full stack engineer, to me, yeah, the engineering principles coming together. And I like the term software engineer because you're building software, you're building a platform as a whole and not focusing on a specific domain.
And do you have any preference yourself?
I'm a software engineer.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, my title at Fyllo is a software engineer. I'm not a full stack engineer, but I feel like the terms are interchangeable and it depends on the company you go to. Truthfully, a full stack engineer is just a way for a company to be like, hey, you need to do all of it without hiring people focused in certain areas.
Right. It's good to have these different opinions. It's good to also understand that even if we say full stack, it doesn't mean that you have to be great in everything.
Yeah, you understand the software lifecycle. You understand how all these technologies piece together, a general idea of what I need to do to deliver a full-on product and not just be siloed in front end and be like, oh, well, I need to make a change to the API, but I don't know how to touch that API or how to make those changes on the back end.
Now let's go to your transition. It has been not so long ago, I think like 2 months ago, that you became
June 1st, yeah.
June 1st.
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, that's a nice day. Easy to remember. So yeah, you became a team lead. And because I understand you are a passionate software developer. So how was that for you? What would you say are the challenges? Because, in this podcast, I would like to let some developers know who are thinking about maybe changing to become a manager of other people. And they consider like, okay, what does it actually mean? What are the challenges? What will I have to sacrifice to be a leader?
Yeah. So before I was offered the role as team lead for the US Fyllo team, I was already doing about 70% IC and, not doing the management duties yet. But what was happening was, I was participating in a lot of meetings, making sure that there's a collaboration between teams, making sure that we're following the best practices during like code reviews and making sure that we are doing our due diligence when deciding on new technologies, new design patterns, or new implementations. So to me, that's a senior or principal engineer type responsibilities. But then when I transitioned into the team lead role, it shifted to still doing 70% IC, but then the other 30% doing management duties such as one-on-ones, performance. I kind of got thrown into the team lead position during mid-year reviews, so I had to do that since I've been working with the team already since January. I would say not a shock factor, but the difference was getting more personal with your colleagues now that I'm doing one-on-ones, understanding their work-life balance and their not issues, but their concerns or the difficulties that they're having, within the team or within the organization, and trying to juggle still completing 70% IC work, trying to contribute to our sprint velocity while also juggling the needs of the team and making sure that they're getting the resources that they need or the help, or just making sure that they have what they need to contribute to the team 100%. And for me, that really slowed me down in my own sprint velocity because I have to reach out to multiple teams, making sure that we're still collaborating with PMs and everyone. And if they have any type of issues with their sprint work, helping them get unblocked and helping them. I keep coming back to this one word, but everything that they need to accomplish what they need to accomplish.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, makes
trying
sense.
to-
But I'm actually surprised that you said that, let's say, administrative work is just 30% and 70% is still like a software developer role.
yeah,
Did I understand that correctly?
yes. I feel like we do quick 20-minute one-on-ones each week.
Mhm.
I do feel that if you give your engineers like autonomy and basically not hand holding them, empowering them, making sure
Mhm.
that they have the confidence to make certain decisions, especially with their stories, and pushing them to take ownership of their own work, you really don't need to be managing them too much in my experience. I've come from out systems where I felt micromanaged. I've came from ForgeRock where I was very empowered. And at ForgeRock, really, we had the ability to make certain decisions, architectural decisions, implementation decisions, and just by us having the runway to do what we know is best and pulling in the best technology, the best design principles, we always made the right decision with our implementation and making sure that we're delivering high quality code and making sure that it's maintainable and scalable. So that's the approach that I've been trying to take, is more take a step back, provide support when needed, make sure that they have everything that they need. But at the end of the day, they are seniors, they are engineers who are capable of making those decisions. So allow them to make them and just be there to support them.
Wow, I love that. It's great.
Yeah.
And especially the part of empowering other people. And I see that a lot on the daily basis because we work together and the team is pretty new, right? The team itself, I think they started last year.
Yeah, I think Harry and Carlos have been here the longest. They were here about like 6 or so months before I got here in January. But
Mhm.
everyone else on the team right now, we're a team of six and then seven, including me. Yeah, have been here basically just around January of 2022.
So we can say that the team is half a year old. And
Yeah.
you can see really how great people are coming together, participating, collaborating. And this is really great that you notice that and you step back and let them self-organize. What I see a lot that sometimes some team leads would just go and micromanage people because they just don't know any other way. And also people are maybe sometimes used to that they are told what to do.
Mhm.
I don't know if it's also the cultural thing that, everybody that you manage, they are all from the States and they are all in remote, right? So there is no office that
Yep.
everybody can go to and just see each other. I think most of the people never saw each other in real life,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, we never met.
Yeah, which is amazing that you can still pull this off. And this also shows how things changed after COVID, right? That we would
Mhm.
never think about this. Well, there were teams like GitLab and all the Basecamp and so on that they were always preaching the distributed team setup, but it felt so utopian to me. And right now, here we are, right? In this totally
Yeah.
remote, and people still come together and collaborate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been working remote now for about 4 years. Even before COVID, the engineering teams that I've had that I've been on that were mostly remote engineers, in my opinion, always had, I mean, it really depends on the person and their personality, but for the most part, when working remote, being able to have the flexibility of if in between meetings I'm, washing dishes and then I come back, I feel like people take more ownership over their stuff. It's also going back to ownership, not micromanaging, like if I'm constantly reaching out, hey, what's the status of this story, what's the status of this other story, kind of slows people down. Like one of the things that I really enjoy about engineering is that we're on a 3 week sprint cycle. At the end of the day, as long as your commitments get done, and we at the start of the sprint we commit to a certain amount of deliverables, as long as we deliver what we commit to for that sprint, it doesn't really matter how or when you complete those individual tasks, as long as we are delivering on our commitment each sprint. And I feel like, yeah, now that like the last like 3 sprints, right? Or like
Mhm.
the last 2 sprints, we actually been delivering almost our full commitment, other than like some other like little issues that, yeah, I think we need
That
to
always
solve.
happens.
But they're outside of our team.
I was very surprised because we started working together, like looking more closely at the processes recently. And what you just said, I've never seen such perfect burn down charts as in your team. So we are doing some changes, right? I think the stories get smaller and the epics get smaller, and the team really starts collaborating better. That
Mhm.
you can really see this in the metrics, not only that we feel we're doing better, right? But the
Yeah.
metrics speak for that. And it is really great for me to know that you can really have this kind of well-performing team, even though nobody ever met and everybody's just working remotely.
Yeah, and another thing that this last sprint that I've been trying to do is, I've been saying this in my one-on-ones lately. You got to slow down to speed up. I've been really like trying to make sure that the team is working on stuff that they find interesting. Harry specific, he's pushing to become a senior engineer, and he understands that he lacks front end knowledge and the really in-depth React experience. So one of the things that I notice is that by having him take on more front-end things, it slows him down in the sense of what he can commit during the whole sprint, his velocity. But in the end, it speeds him up because he's getting more knowledge about the other domains of the product. And two, he actually finds it intriguing. He's motivated to make sure that he doesn't fail. As self-taught, not going to school for engineering, my point of view is if you can find something that interests you, motivates you, you're never going to not complete it. You're always going to make sure, even if it takes you a day longer, you're going to make sure you're going to do it the correct way. You're going to make sure that you complete it by the end of the sprint because you're motivated and find it very interesting to do. I mean, that's where my OCD comes in. I'm like, I just find something that's interesting, and then I will do anything and everything possible to make sure I implement it correctly using that technology.
Okay, I have two things here. So I will start
Yeah.
with the first one. I noted that. I really like what you're saying. So you try to understand the developers that are in your team beyond just work, right? What really motivates them, and try to respond like, okay, if this motivates you, why don't you just do more of this? Even though it will slow us down in short term, in the long run, we will have a real full stack developer, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And on top of that, if someone's doing something that they are not enjoying, they're going to get burnt out. They're not going to
Mhm.
deliver high quality code. It's just going to be mundane. And in the end, it's not going to be good for the company. We're going to have a burnt out engineer who's, potentially going to start looking to leave, and they're not going to be doing their best work because it doesn't interest them anymore.
Yeah, I think that's very important. The aspirational part, like that in the motivation. So, how do we make sure that we deliver on time and we deliver with quality, but we don't get people burned down in the process, right?
Yep.
So, keeping people motivated and letting them work on what they consider interests them, I think, is a very great way to do so. And then I started laughing when you mentioned the OCD, and you are not the first developer that I meet that has some OCD. So do you think that actually helps in the role, software developer?
Yes and no. Uh,
I love the pod.
Yes, because it would make the engineer more likely to try to find the right way to do things. You choose, the best technology, the best design pattern, the best way to make something work. Where I there and this comes back to like there's a balance, right? You have to have enough OCD. I don't like to say OCD. I think it's just more of like being intrigued
Mhm.
to implement something, correctly. But then where I feel like it hinders us is, we kind of have to put blinders up, course blinders. Like I can go for days and be like, oh, I found a better way of doing something, and then
Yeah.
start implementing it that way, and then go, oh, I found another way. As a full stack engineer, depending on the language you're using and what technologies, there's multiple ways to do something. So there's always going to be the OCD of, at least for me at least, I want to refactor it. I want to change it. I found a better way of doing it. Oh, this doesn't make sense. We have to find the balance of, yes, finding the right way of doing something is ideal, but we also have, our commitments to the company. We have to make sure our features are deliverable. We have to make sure that we don't introduce too much scope creep, too much tech debt, and
So find the
yeah,
perfect balance
we have to
between
find the balance.
hacking and doing some
Yeah,
hacks and actually refactoring everything over and over because it's never perfect, right?
exactly. But then it also comes back to, I have a very strong opinion about this is that that problem can be solved if we introduce a design phase into sprints or epics or seasons or however you want to phrase it. It's my favorite phrase. You got to slow down to speed up. You have to take a step back, design, understand what you're trying to build, understand future desires from the company, wants from the customers, and actually try to build a solid foundation so that you can speed up and you can build out this product how you want. And you can take the time to say, hey, how do we do it correctly? Because if you get like a set of requirements for a new feature when the sprint starts, next sprint, I'm going to want to redo it because next sprint I'm getting requirements that I had no idea 3 weeks prior, and I'm like, well, if you just told me all the requirements for the
Mhm.
next 6 months, I could have designed it in such a way that could grow and easily implement all the features that you would want down the road.
Well, I don't know if it's possible that anyone can give you all the requirements for the next 6 months, but I get the
No.
point that it's better to see some long run and long term to not redo something that you just did. I would like to understand, how do you do that? Like, what do you do to implement this design state? This is also something that in our company, many teams are now brainstorming. Like,
Mhm.
should we have some kind of guild where we share the implementation of what we're going to do next? Or should we have like a design document? What's the scope? Like, should we have it for every small task, which probably doesn't make sense? Because in your case, it comes like naturally in your team. It's like emergent and you just,
Mhm.
and I would like to understand, how do you do this?
It's hard because there's a lot of coordination you have to do with PMs to understand the requirements from product. On our team, what we've been trying to do is we're trying to do backlog refinement each week, trying to get eyes onto stories as soon as possible before we get to sprint planning, before we start, doing story pointing, get engineers' eyes on these stories. I would say a sprint in advance so that we can start gathering technical details. We can start, figuring out what is the best way to implement this feature, what are other design considerations or gotchas that we will find during the sprint, which ultimately slows us down. I guess I could say, if I step back, all the questions for the engineer should be answered before sprint starts.
Yeah.
That means architectural. That means yeah, we can't plan 6 months in advance, but we can plan epics. We can plan full on features. Like, we don't have to know what the future holds. We just need to know, for this given feature that we want to implement, let's say that feature will take us 3 sprints to implement. We should spend a sprint. Let's say it takes 4 sprints to actually implement, because we spend a sprint planning that epic out, planning that feature
Mhm.
out, understanding all the requirements, understanding all the infrastructure change, all the whatever we need to do. We just need to slow down, look at the requirements, plan it out, and then start writing the code.
And then speed up.
And then ultimately you will speed up. We won't have a lot of like blockers during sprints. We won't have, going, oh, well, we can't deliver this part of the feature because we didn't think about this other aspect that we need to implement, or even start writing code. And I've had this happen before at past companies where an engineer is implementing the thing, and then next thing you know it, he looks at the Jira ticket and a PM changes the DoD. So now we're either ripping code out or making major modifications just to complete it, and it won't get completed because the scope keeps changing.
Yeah, which is inevitable probably, but I think what you're saying is that, first of all, I really agree with the fact that it's good to take some time to plan and actually digest what's gonna happen, which is like counterintuitive for some people, because it's like, wow, but you are not developing in this time, and we should never, we should just focus on coding and not
Mhm.
planning, because that's waste of time and it's probably a meeting, which basically is not work.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right, it's like a loop, that it's like an infinite loop. Like, okay, if you never plan, if you never stop, That's why we also, in my one of my previous guests, João Alves, who's Portuguese, he was talking a lot about this need and this help of writing things down. What I also see sometimes, we go to a meeting, we try to plan things out, but nobody writes it down. So then before you actually go to the sprint where you will implement this, everybody will forget what you even agreed and why. Because he was saying a lot that this really helps you think, and this really helps you consider different things. And putting something in writing is like a superpower to be able to write, because people understand the same thing because you just have it written and then you can comment on it. So what do you think about this?
I think I absolutely agree with him. One of the things that we started doing in this backlog refinement was, like this week, we're identifying what stories need to be looked at for next sprint, which starts in 3 weeks. During that process, we try to get one or two engineers to get eyes on that story, gather the technical details, write it out, and leave it on the Jira ticket, either as a comment or a part of the description. But basically, even if it's as small as we need to modify this file, this function within that file, that's great. As long as we're thinking about it, writing it down so that anyone who picks up that Jira story knows the technical details of along the lines of how it should be implemented, or, what it's going to entail. I don't know if that 100% is what he was talking about, but I believe you said this earlier in our conversation. During the design phase, or even during implementation of the actual story, we should be keeping a live design document, either in Confluence or wherever you want to store it, even if it's on the repository as readmes. We just need to keep a live document that always changes with why we're making certain implementations, why are we doing something a specific way, so that if anyone does come and modify it or is curious. Am I understanding what he was saying?
So yeah, for sure, it's great to note everything. And I think, yeah, what he meant was like having some living documentation, but also knowing that we can go back to we are in remote. We can't just have meetings for everything. And he was also saying, like, you can just have, like, you have an idea, you want to change some process or whatever, or like change some architecture probably in the code, and then you go and present it to everyone one by one so they understand. And if you write it down and you really put like a lot of thought into how you express, so you make sure it's understandable, it's like a superpower, because then it gets easier and easier to implement those new things and just go more async by having actually some documentation rather than just relying on your memory to remember stuff.
Yeah, so that sounds to me like RFCs, something that I believe you and I have been pushing for a lot at Fyllo. But that would solve a lot of those issues by, one, it gives the engineer the ability to really think about what he wants to change or what he wants to implement. Think about what is the ROI, what is the blast radius of that change, and then for me, what I look for in RFCs is really thinking of, do you have multiple approaches, and what are the pros and cons of those approaches? And along with it, what is the risk, or what is the engineering time needed to complete such a change? And then that would give us, the ability to async, get eyes on it. Everyone has time to digest it. Everyone has time to think about it. Most RFCs, I would say, should have a POC attached to it, not just, in theory it should work, or in theory this will improve our performance, but provide a POC. Like, here's a small proof that what I'm asking to change, or what we're asking to do, it will actually provide a benefit to the company, save us either engineering time or increase performance, but provide the ROI that architects or team leads can go, okay, you've done your due diligence. Everyone has had a say into it. Everyone has pointed out their concerns or their approval, and then we can make decisions based off of that. And then also it gives you like paper trail. If someone comes in later, or a new architect comes in, or a new team lead 2 years down the road, if I've joined companies now, I've always asked this question to myself: why was this implemented this way? You can go back and be like, oh, this is their thought process. But you can go, well, requirements A, B, and C changed. So now you can do an RFC on why you would want to change it again, and provide, details of saying, well, because back then we were under this assumption, now it changed. So let's make another change.
That's awesome because actually I'm smiling because when I was talking to Joao, it was episode number 5. He was actually the person who introduced RFC, request for comments, to me when we worked together back in my taxi free now. And yeah, and that's great that you just made it, made it up yourself in your mind, because yeah, that's actually the point, and that's a great thing to have. It's like right now I'm working with the teams to create their working agreements, and it's
Mhm.
very similar for me, because imagine somebody new joins a team and it takes them a lot of time to understand, okay, how they do this, how they do that, why they do this, why they do that, and then you just present them with a list of, okay, hey, these are our working agreements. You can see when we're doing
Mhm.
dailies and what's the why we're doing in this way, and it gives so much value and understanding for the new people, right?
I mean, also existing people, if you have multiple teams, or most companies, we have teams that are siloed and don't have that great of coordination, especially when you're working with like global teams. Yeah, like it's great for onboarding. It's great for new people coming on board to understand and, the whys and how things were implemented, but it also provides, architects, team leads, other engineers on other teams understanding, the platform that they work in every day on the changes that are being made. And they can go back. I mean, I definitely work on things and that I write, and I come back a month later. I'm like, why was it written this way? And then I get blame it, and I'm like, well, I'm the one to blame. And I don't leave my own paper trail. And I ask myself, like, why did I write it that way?
Hmm.
I don't remember the current requirements. I mean, not just Confluence documentation like RFCs, but like leaving comments. Like one thing that I've been trying to get my team to do is when they have conversations with our architect Amihai or other teams about how they're going to implement a certain user story, what I've been pushing for is please leave a comment in that story on the outcome of that conversation, because it gets lost and now it's in that engineer's head.
Hmm.
But when they go ahead and implement and merge their merge request, if you come back and you go, oh, why was this done that way? They're going to lose it, because they're going to switch their context to the next user story, and now they're digging through Slack or whatever communication tool that they're using, but they're going to be searching for it. And having those conversations, and even if it's not a living document in the Confluence as documentation, leave it in this user story as a comment of the outcome of certain conversations, will leave a better paper trail on why certain
Yeah,
decisions were made.
makes a lot of sense. And I'm thinking right now, since you mentioned an architect, that you're kind of an architect for the team. I don't mean in the technical way, but like in processes and the organizational way, right? Because you design, like you have a vision for what you would like the team to be, probably. And then it's on you to make, for example, there are the RFCs, or there are other good development practices that you would like to say, well, I would like the team to try. So I would like to understand, how do you do that? If you have, because you just mentioned a lot of practices that we would like to use, your head is full of ideas. So could you explain how you are taking, because now as a team lead, it's different. You used to be an individual contributor. You could just give an idea and they could take it or leave it, right? But right now that you are in a leadership and managing position, how do you do that? So it's not like, oh, you have to do this. It's more like, hey, I have this idea. What do you think about it?
Yeah, so funny enough, backlog refinement that I implemented, we're doing it once a week, going through the backlog, trying to, gather the technical details before we go into sprint planning. That was a decision that I made, that I felt we need to start designing user stories before we get to them. Now, we did that for 2 sprints, and just in our recent retro, we decided as a team that it was a waste of 30 minutes. We were doing it asynchronously through Slack, and we were doing it really well. And we decided, hey, we don't need an extra meeting. We're going to stop doing this. So for me, how I see it is that I do come up with ideas, but at the end of the day, it's a team. And in our retros, we try to like ask, like, what could we do better and how could we do it? And if someone comes up with an idea, or I come up with an idea, we can try it for a sprint. If it doesn't work, we trash it and move on. It's weird because you mentioned like architecting like processes, but it's how I see it is identifying a problem, throwing a bunch of things at the wall and see what sticks, and then try them. And if it doesn't work as a team, because what works for our team might work for the EU team, but
Mhm.
and then also what or vice versa. So it's trying to figure out what works for the actual team.
You don't like make people do something, you just throw ideas and what sticks
Yeah,
and they
I don't
have a
make
say.
anyone do anything new. I might push for something to try and then bring up and say, "Does how does everyone feel about this?" Like after we did it for a couple of weeks, making that like executive quote unquote decision of like, "Hey, we're going to try this," but then everyone has to agree that they see a benefit in it because I kind of took that from Ford Rock. I took that from they called them seasons. So every 3 sprints, the squads changed. So you're working with a completely new bunch of people. And one of the things that I really liked was that when the squads changed as a team, you elected a squad leader. And then as a group, you decided what ceremonies you're going to do. You decided, what processes you're going to do, how we're going to do refinement, planning, as long as we commit to the work that we need to commit to for that's quote unquote season, we had the autonomy to make the decisions for our actual squad. I felt why that worked so well was because there was no true, I'm going to use the word dictator, but no one managing and saying you have to do X, Y, and
Mm.
Z. Giving the power a little bit to your team to make sure that, hey, do you agree with daily stand-ups? Do you agree with weekly backlog refinements? Do you see benefit in it? And if everyone agrees that there's no benefit or there is a benefit, that's what's going to make your team efficient, not,
Mhm.
at the organization level saying all teams must do this because what works for me doesn't work for everyone else.
Okay, so that's where you came with all this inclination towards self-organization of the teams, and we go back to what we were speaking about, Harry, and motivation, right? It's totally different motivation when you have a say in how you will do your work, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And I think what you're doing is basically you're selling your ideas as experiments to the team. And then they have a say to say, like, okay, this works for us, or this doesn't really work because of that and that. And then we can iterate and have another idea. So no harm. Like,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Exactly. And of course, there's always a balance of giving too much control to everyone because as long as everyone knows what they need to accomplish, everyone knows how what they're working on fits into the greater picture. And in my mind, a team lead helps them glue those pieces together so that they understand the bigger picture of not just what they're working on within the team affects other people within the team, but also how does our pieces fit into the greater platform that other teams are working on, and identifying where we need collaboration, where we need more focusing on gluing those pieces, like bringing those pieces
Mhm.
into the team and make sure the team understands. So I feel like, the team lead is the architect to bring all the unknowns together for the team and allowing them to handle what they need to handle, on the individual level of implementation and doing their work, but just being there once again to make sure that they have everything that they need to accomplish their tasks and being there as more of a I would say more of a support, leading them by supporting them might
Okay.
be a best way to say it.
Very nice way to say it. Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, like, if there's juniors or mid-level engineers, of course you need to mentor them and help them level up their skills. But for the most part, our team is full of seniors and seniors don't like to be micromanaged. They shouldn't have to have their hands held and just more of like trust that we're paying good money for them, for their experience, trust them.
Yeah. I love that. And I like the part. I heard this a lot. I don't know if there's a term for this glue work, It's like instead of team lead, you could be just like a glue manager because in the end, I heard this so many times. So I think it makes really sense because in the end, what you're doing is you're providing with context, right? Because I think
Exactly.
what you need to for the people to understand is so they understand the intent behind what we are doing. I really like that part. The Martin timeline, popular in the product realm, and he's writing a book on sprint goals. There is this commander's intent behind a goal when you go to like a war or in the military. And for me, it actually made sense. It's not just that you put like, this is your goal. Okay, this is my goal. I like to have a goal, and it really is helpful. But if I don't understand why the goal is there, you might go and do something totally wrong because you are fulfilling the goal. And maybe meanwhile, the conditions changed. And if you knew what's the context and why you are heading toward that goal, you might have foresee, So I think this is very important, and this is great because then your job is more to provide this context to people, and then they can really self-organize within the boundaries that are set for them. Just to finish on this subject, have you ever used your position to actually command something like you have to do this, full stop?
Well, have I?
Because I can imagine this can also sometimes be the case. I'm also thinking about like what would be the reason that you have to do this way, but well, I'm the boss.
I don't think it was ever commanding.
Okay.
It was just more of like, so I would say no to the question, just because as a team lead, I haven't had to, quote unquote, put your foot down on certain things. I think that I have stepped into a position where I have said no to certain design implementation, but I contribute that to being in the senior engineer role, not just a team lead, but like, listening to like a senior, like if it was another senior engineer
Like a
saying, hey,
tech
this is
lead.
not, like more of a tech lead than a management type
Mhm.
commanding. It was just more of like, I have not been in a position where I've had to use the position to dictate, what was going on. Like a lot of the stuff has been collaboration as a team. A lot of stuff has been, there's stuff like behind the closed doors of like the one-on-ones, of course, asking people to be more available or making sure that, hey, you need to work on certain aspects within their career. But other than that, I would say no. I mean, I definitely have commanded as from a senior perspective, but not as a team lead yet. No.
Okay. So before we go, I always do like two last questions that are
No
always the
worries.
same. But before we go there, I would like to ask you like one last question. In your transition to become a team lead, is there anybody or anything that helped you? Like, do you rely on somebody that is like coaching or mentoring you? Or do you have, well, maybe you read an article, so and read a book or something that really you think could be helpful for other leaders?
I've definitely have been trying to read more articles. I don't have any specific in mind
Mm-hmm.
that stood out to me, but I do have a mentor, Robert Cusick. This would be my fourth company working with him. It's very helpful having him available to reach out and be like, hey, I'm dealing with this issue with this engineer. He brought up his concerns in the one-on-one, like, how would you handle it? Or kind of just getting feedback on how do you handle certain situations, because the one thing as an individual contributor I never had to worry about was people's personal lives. Of course, I became friends with engineers and I've like they're great colleagues, but I never had to really give much thought to what's going on in their lives, what's stressing them, are they feeling burnt out, just all these, a whole nother layer of the
The
piece of,
psychological level,
yeah, the
right?
psychological and doing reviews and stuff like that. So it's been very helpful having Robert there to support me. By he doesn't tell me, and I think a lot of ways I get my management skills from him, just because he's very transparent. He gives his opinion, but he doesn't dictate. He doesn't like directly tell you you need to do this. He just says his opinion and then basically leaves it at that. Like, even though there's sometimes that I want more, I want to be like, no, give me a direction. He does leave it on the table to be interpreted the way that I will interpret it and handle it. And usually it's always, I mean, I would not say usually, I'm always, it's always been the like best advice, but I do think that I pull a lot of my experiences having him as my manager, and I try to incorporate that into my position.
Yeah, I agree. Robert is a really great leader. And especially, that part of him dealing with so many different cultures, people, and he's always in a good mood and he always has something good to say. And
Yep.
even though he can get like really nervous or like unhappy, and he's very straightforward, which is very funny for me. But then you can never get offended by the way he
No.
says something that's like some people would like my brain
Yeah.
exploded, somebody said a bad word, but he would do it in a way that you just laugh with him instead of at
Yeah.
him, right?
Yeah. It's interesting because he, like I said, he's transparent, but he's straight to the point. He doesn't beat around any corners. He doesn't do it in a way that comes off as aggressive. But I guess could you say maybe the phrase would be like when he says something like it just has a lot of weight behind it,
Mm.
like it having the technical expertise behind it. No, he can get into like the weeds of code and debugging and troubleshooting, and he doesn't like lead by, how should I phrase it? Like when I said leading by support, like leading with
Mhm.
support, I think underlying I do get that from him because he doesn't come to me or comes to the team as like, hey, there's a production issue. Like, hey, you guys need to figure it out right now. He would get in the weeds. He would troubleshoot. He would look at the code. He would be pointing out, could it be this or this? So he's leading by supporting us and not just saying, go fix it. He's like, I'm going to help you. But, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I really need to interview Robert because he has a lot of great things. I also work with him the second time already. And it's great to have such a mentor in whichever role we are in, totally different
Mhm.
roles, and we get the same mentor. In any role, it's just a great tip for anybody who is looking to become a manager or a leader. Even individual contributor and like getting ahead in the career, is just great to find somebody who can support you. And I really
Yep.
like what you said, like leading by supporting people. It's really cool. Well, there will be many quotes from this conversation.
Perfect.
So thanks for that. And last but not least, the two questions. So first one, I think we touched on it right now. I usually ask, what would be your tip for a first time manager? So somebody that is just considering whether I should go and be a manager or I should keep on being technically involved more. What would you say when somebody gets into a role of managing people? What would be the tip? Apart, maybe it's what we just said, like finding a mentor, or maybe something else. Also, like how not to get overwhelmed.
For me, I like juggling different pieces. I really love being like very logical and like, yeah, I'm really good at just juggling a lot of things. But as a tip,
No, it's okay. Maybe it's one of the things. You will be juggling many things, so you better like it.
yeah, well, yeah, a lot of meetings. Ugh, way too many meetings. Like there is a tip that I have in my mind, but I'm trying to figure out how to articulate it. Focusing on like the technical aspects of being a team lead, but also really listening and paying attention to what your engineers are saying. And I would say the tip is like to always remember that it is a team. It's not, you're not the captain. It is a team collaboration, and that what others are saying is very important to how well your team runs.
Thank you. And last one, especially now that we are in a remote, which for you apparently was the reality for years already. But how do you see the leadership role evolving, given that you don't get to meet those people in real life? Or, we have also the Generation Z coming in, that are totally different than what we were millennials, or at least I
Mhm.
was. So how do you see this evolving? What skills will be needed for leaders of the future?
I don't know. I've been working in this remote role for so long with like managers being
Mhm.
remote as well. Yeah, I would say, something that I don't do enough of is turning on the camera.
Yeah, I
Maybe,
know.
yeah. I do think that, most people, especially in this industry, are used to working with remote teams. And even if you're in the office or at home, are familiar with doing things over Google Meet, Zoom. So I would say more camera on time and more, taking time before stand up or before meetings and having that small talk, talking about the weekends and trying to connect on a personal level, because it's very easy to be just work colleagues working remote. It's easy to disconnect and be like, oh, it's the weekend, I'm not going to communicate with you, or no, I'm not going to ask how your weekend was. So I feel like connecting on that personal level more and getting to know them will help a long ways, because then it becomes fun to work with people, if that answers that question.
Yeah, that answers it perfectly. Thank you for that. I agree. And I'm the one to tell everyone to actually put their camera on. You know that
I know.
yourself. So I
I,
agree
I've
with
been
your tip.
I've been doing it for one-on-ones, just so you know.
Good
Yeah.
to know, because for me, that's the strangest moment when I go into one-on-one with somebody and they won't turn their camera on, and sometimes you actually, even I would ask sometimes, and sometimes I would not even ask because I feel like I'm like crossing some boundary with somebody that they obviously don't want to turn it on. And just by me asking, I'm like pushing them to do something they don't want. I
I
think,
feel like there is one disconnect though, right? Like, I don't know what time it is there, but it's late in the afternoon, right?
it's 5 p.m.
So usually, like on some calls, it's 8 a.m. Most engineers just roll out of bed. So it's like, of course, like if it's noon or 3 o'clock, I will absolutely turn my camera on. But at 8 a.m., I'm not ready. I'm like drinking my coffee. I'm probably just got on the call without doing my hair or anything.
No
It's like,
makeup. Oh my God.
yeah, I mean, gotta look presentable.
But yeah, I think it was you or Mark who said that to me. I was like, oh my God, I never thought about this. That, you're in your pajamas probably. And it's like,
Yeah.
ooh, I'm not even at my desk yet. I'm just listening to like a meeting that there is. So yeah, I can imagine. But I think it's just good to maybe have people just say like, hey, sorry, I'm not putting my camera because of this, that. And then it's totally
Mhm.
different than if I'm like, people can get personal. These are kind of stuff that you think like, oh, they don't like me. They don't want to show their face to
Mhm.
me. They are actually laughing at me and not.
Do people really think that?
No, I'm not. Well,
Uh,
sometimes I do. Because especially at the beginning when you don't know people, you don't know.
yeah.
And of course,
Yeah.
we tend to have these worst scenarios.
Yeah,
Now
I
it
feel
happens.
like I do think that it depends on the call. I think one-on-ones and stand-ups probably should have majority of the people with the cameras on. But at the ad hoc ones, or doing retro and stuff like that, where people might be writing stuff down or Googling ideas while we're talking about design implementation, like
Like
there is a
grooming.
need. There is certain calls that I can see that there's an expectation of having that personal connection and by turning on our cameras. But at the same time, there's calls that don't require it. And
All right.
without this being on any recording, I mean, there's plenty of times where I'm not, like, there's meetings that are not beneficial to me, and I'm completely ignoring the meeting. I'm working on something. I'm not participating. But at the same time, that also highlights a big problem. Like, I forgot who quoted this, but it's like, if you're not contributing to the meeting or getting anything out of it, why are you on that call?
Yeah, the famous law of 2 feet, right? Use your two
Yeah.
feet and go away, which was in the time that we were in the office. But right now, I also agree because I would prefer not to have somebody and tell, like, say, but it's so hard to say to people, you know what, your meeting is useless for me. Like, I don't, of course, you won't say it in this. So you would say to somebody, hey, I really don't find much value for myself on this meeting. So I will just drop. Like, who
No,
would
no
say
one's gonna
that,
do that.
right?
No one.
Exactly. So I think, but I think also it is a bit about being courageous. One of the values is always like being courageous. And I think it would be to just tell the person in person, not like in private on Slack, like, hey, on that meeting, I think maybe you have some other ideas. But I think it would be profitable because, especially I identify with that a lot because I'm like the meeting person. Like, my work
Mhm.
doesn't count if there's no meeting. So
Yeah.
I would appreciate really from people to say, hey, Maria, I was on this meeting. I think we could do it a bit differently. I don't really think we need that meeting, And then it's like, okay, I've never thought about this because I'm always in this facilitator role.
Yeah.
It's hard to put myself in the shoes and get some other perspective. I try, but I not always succeed.
Yeah.
But that goes back to, developing trust with the person enough for them to be able to tell you the hard truth sometimes.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a very nice note to finish our meeting where we actually turned on our camera. For
I'll be
now,
better at it.
I appreciate that. So thank you so much for joining. I really enjoyed, and I got a lot of great quotes. You were making my life easier because then I put the quotes somewhere like on Instagram and LinkedIn, and you have so many quotes that I already pointed them here. And that was great. I hope we get to talk more in the future of this podcast and also at Fyllo.
Yeah, thank you. It was a great conversation.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.